Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. The matter of fact is that the matron was in no way overpowered by Mr. Bumble's scowl, but, on the contrary, treated it with great disdain, and even raised a laugh thereat, which sounded as though it were genuine. On hearing this most unexpected sound, Mr. Bumble looked, first incredulous, and afterwards amazed. He then relapsed into his former state, nor did he rouse himself until his attention was again awakened by the voice of his partner. "Are you going to sit snoring there all day?" inquired Mrs. Bumble. "I'm going to sit here as long as I think proper, ma'am," rejoined Mr. Bumble. "And although I was not snoring, I shall snore, gape, sneeze, laugh, or cry as the humor strikes me, such being my prerogative." "Your prerogative?" sneered Mrs. Bumble, with ineffable contempt. "I said the word, ma'am," said Mr. Bumble. "The prerogative of a man is to command." "And what's the prerogative of a woman, in the name of goodness?" cried the relict of Mr. Corney deceased. "To obey, ma'am," thundered Mr. Bumble. "Your late unfortunate husband should have taught it you. And then, perhaps, he might have been alive now. I wish he was, poor man." Mrs. Bumble, seeing at a glance that the decisive moment had now arrived, and that a blow for the mastership on one side or other must necessarily be final and conclusive, no sooner heard this allusion to the dead and gone than she dropped into a chair, and with a loud scream that Mr. Bumble was a hard-hearted brute, fell into the paroxysm of tears. But tears were not things to find their way to Mr. Bumble's soul. His heart was waterproof. Like washable beaver hats that improve with rain, his nerves were rendered stouter and more rigorous by showers of tears, which, being tokens of weakness, and so far tacit admissions of his own power, pleased and exalted him. He eyed his good lady with looks of great satisfaction, and begged in an encouraging manner that she should cry her hardest. The exercise being looked upon by the faculty as strongly conducive to health. "It opens the lungs, washes the countenance, exercises the eyes, and softens down the temper," said Mr. Bumble. "So cry away." As he discharged himself off this pleasantry, Mr. Bumble took his hat from a peg, and putting it on rather rakishly on one side, as a man might who felt he had asserted his superiority in a becoming manner, thrust his hands into his pockets, and sauntered towards the door, with much ease and waggishness depicted in his whole appearance. Now Mrs. Corney that was had tried the tears, because they were less troublesome than a manual assault, but she was quite prepared to make trial of the latter mode of proceeding, as Mr. Bumble was not long in discovering. The first proof he experienced of the fact was conveyed in a hollow sound, immediately succeeded by the sudden flying off of his hat to the opposite end of the room. This preliminary proceeding laying bare his head, the expert lady, clasping him tightly round the throat with one hand, inflicted a shower of blows, dealt with singular vigor and dexterity upon it with the other. This done, she created a little variety by scratching his face and tearing his hair, and by having this time and having by this time inflicted as much punishment as she deemed necessary for the offense, she pushed him over a chair, which was luckily well situated for the purpose, and defied him to talk about his prerogative again, if he dared. "Get up," said Mrs. Bumble in a voice of command, "and take yourself away from here, unless you want me to do something desperate." Mr. Bumble rose with a very rueful countenance, wondering much what something desperate might be. Picking up his hat, he looked towards the door. "Are you going?" demanded Mr. Bumble. "Certainly, my dear, certainly," rejoined Mrs. Bumble, making a quicker motion towards the door. "I didn't intend to. I'm going, my dear. You are so very violent that really I..." Excuse me, that was Mr. Bumble. At this instant, Mrs. Bumble stepped hastily forward to replace the carpet, which had been kicked up in the scuffle. Mr. Bumble immediately darted out of the room without bestowing another thought on his unfinished sentence, leaving the late Mrs. Corney in full possession of the field. Mr. Bumble was fairly taken by surprise and fairly beaten. He had a decided propensity for bullying, derived no inconsiderable pleasure from the exercise of petty cruelty, and consequently was, it is needless to say, a coward. This is by no means a disparagement to his character, for many official personages, who are held in high respect and admiration, are the victims of similar infirmities. The remark is made, indeed, rather in his favor than otherwise, and with the view of impressing the reader with a just sense of his qualifications for office. But the measure of his degradation was not yet full. After making a tour of the house and thinking, for the first time, that the poor laws really were too hard on people, and that men who ran away from their wives, leaving them chargeable to the parish, ought in justice to be visited with no punishment at all, but rather rewarded as meritorious individuals who had suffered much, Mr. Bumble came to a room where some of the female paupers were usually employed in washing the parish linen, when the sound of voices in conversation now proceeded. "Hem," said Mr. Bumble, summoning up all his native dignity. "These women at least shall continue to respect the prerogative. Hallo! Hallo there! What do you mean by this noise, you hussies?" With these words, Mr. Bumble opened the door, and walked in with a very fierce and angry manner, which was at once exchanged for a most humiliated and cowering air, as his eyes unexpectedly rested on the form of his lady wife. "My dear," said Mr. Bumble, "I didn't know you were here." "Didn't know I was here?" repeated Mrs. Bumble. "What do you do here?" "I thought they were talking rather too much to be doing their work properly, my dear," replied Mr. Bumble, glancing distractedly at a couple of old women at the washtub, who were comparing notes of admiration at the workhouse master's humility. "You thought they were talking too much," said Mrs. Bumble. "What business is it of yours?" "Why, my dear," urged Mr. Bumble submissively. "What business is it of yours?" demanded Mrs. Bumble again. "It's very true you're the matron here, my dear," submitted Mr. Bumble, "but I thought you might not be in the way just then." "I'll tell you what, Mr. Bumble," returned his lady, "we don't want any of your interference. You're a great deal too fond of poking your nose into things that don't concern you, making everybody in the house laugh the moment your back is turned, and making yourself look like a fool every hour in the day. Be off, come!" And we'll stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.